I want to welcome Bethany Wilcoxon to the podium. Bethany is from Des Moines, Iowa, and her bio there is in your program. And when I got it from her, I thought, this is kind of short. Well, Bethany is just a recent graduate of Iowa State, right? Got the right one, Iowa State. She told me last night that she was a little concerned that she is in the role that she's in, which is sort of my companion role, that this is kind of a project-defining moment for her in her career, that she's so young, just having recently graduated. But what was most impressive about Bethany was her grasp of regionalism and the important matters and facts as it relates to planning. And never having met her before last night, I know that Des Moines, Iowa is in very good hands with her guiding their effort. So with that, please welcome Bethany to the podium.
Now, as has been said earlier this morning, there are numerous grantees across the country working on similar projects. And what I found interesting over the past couple of years is no matter what part of the country we're in, if it's more urban areas, more rural areas, we're all facing very similar challenges, similar opportunities, and even similar solutions as we move forward with them. So with that, I'd like to provide a little bit of a background on Greater Des Moines. How many people have been to Des Moines or Iowa even? So a fairly good number, wonderful. Then I'm going to move into some of our regional strengths, looking at all of the boards around the room, very similar to some of the challenges and strengths you have going on in this region. Talk again about some of the challenges that we're facing. Again, I feel bad sometimes. The Greater Des Moines area has weathered this latest recession very well, so talking about some of the challenges and some of the other grantees sometimes really helps put it in perspective for us. And then talking about some of the outcomes we're hoping to achieve as we move forward. We are moving towards the end of our planning process. We're scheduled to wrap up in February. So we're getting down there, which is very exciting, but it's also a little bit daunting to think that we're so close to moving towards implementation. With that, we'll talk about Greater Des Moines 101. And first, I want to frame this up that we're really being led by two primary questions. First, what will regional development in Greater Des Moines look like? And secondly, how do we go about getting there? Greater Des Moines has never done a plan like this before. It's been the cities and the counties doing their own plans. I work for the Metropolitan Planning Organization, which does long-range transportation planning. But we've never done something like this, looking at land use, looking at governance, looking at air and water quality, all simultaneously. So this is really something new and exciting for our region. But with that, it's also had many challenges. So we are located in the heart of Iowa. On the map there, you can see the tiny red blob in the middle of the state. We are the most populous area in Iowa. Right now, our metro area is around 480,000 residents, but by 2050, we're expecting to be around 750,000 residents. So a lot smaller than this area, but again, we're expecting some big growth, so we need to determine where are all those new residents going to live. Are we going to have the appropriate housing types? Do we have the existing infrastructure in place that can support that population? We do lie at the crossroads of two major interstates, Interstates 35 and Interstate 80, running across the country, major trade routes, travel routes throughout our country, so prime location as we move forward. As I mentioned, 17 communities, portions of 4 counties, capital city of Des Moines, it's right around 200,000 people. We have communities, though, with just over 1,000 people, so really trying to balance that urban issue as well as the suburban issues and the rural issues. Over 500 square miles, again, core downtown area, moving into some of the most prime farmland in the entire world. So how do we deal with those challenges? As I alluded to earlier, really looking at this integrated framework, we're really pushing the idea of systems thinking as it looks like you are doing here. We can't separate all of these different topics from one another. For so long, the MPO that I work at has focused just on transportation. We haven't been allowed to look at the land use pieces, the governance pieces, the education pieces. But what sense does that make? When we're looking at transportation by itself in its own silo, we're missing out on the big picture. So that's really what we're trying to push with the Tomorrow Plan, looking at the economic pieces, the built environment, the natural environment, the social issues, and the resource flows, all simultaneously. So we're getting that big picture and making sure we're using our resources as efficiently and effectively as possible. As I mentioned, we are moving towards wrapping up this process. Kicked off last year, 20-month planning process. We had a great event at our state historical building, had numerous public events throughout the course of the process, developed a baseline model, really looking at the trends and conditions of the past 20 years, and if those continue out to year 2050, what might that mean for our region? Looking at that map, we saw huge amounts of suburban development. Some people thought that continued growth pattern was wonderful. Others thought that was the most horrible thing in the world, and we needed to make some drastic changes. From there, we developed some different alternatives for our region. We looked at the business as usual model, taking that same model, but then looked at smaller lots. If our zoning codes stay the same, but we develop at the highest density allowed, what might our region look like? We also looked at if the community's future land use plans come to fruition. What might that look like for our region? One interesting note with that scenario, as I mentioned earlier, we're projecting a population of 750,000 people by the year 2050. If we take the city's plans by themselves, we would be a region of 2 million people. Now, it's a huge difference, and it's also important to keep in mind the state of Iowa's population is just over 3 million people. So are 2 million people really going to live all in that region? Probably not very realistic. So I think that just really underscores the importance of working together as a region and stepping back and looking at that big picture beyond our own jurisdictional boundaries. And finally, we had the future scenario, or the best practices scenario, looking at if we're very aggressive with protection of natural areas, if we're looking at more infill areas, what might our region look like then? So we've gone through that process, and now we're in the process of determining what that preferred scenario is, working with our steering committee to see what is the future that we want for our region. We're imagining it's going to end up somewhere between that future land use scenario and that best practices scenario. Really looking at those two scenarios, the outputs weren't that far off, but finding that happy medium of what's realistic, but where can we also push the envelope a little bit more to make some real progress for our region. And then finally, moving towards implementation, writing the plan, figuring out how we go about making those incremental changes to get to that better future for people's kids and their grandkids. That's one issue. I know it's difficult looking into the future. We're looking out to 2050. Many people say, well, I won't be around at that point. But the thing is, it's not just about you. It's about your kids, your grandkids, and really your legacy. As I've mentioned, we have a steering committee. It's about 25 people, about half of which are elected officials. This is imperative to the success of the plan. These are the ones that are going to be moving forward through their city councils, county supervisors, and really making sure that we have the power to implement this. The MPO does not have any authority to mandate any of these changes, so that's something that we've been wrestling with and really trying to bring communities along as we move forward in the planning process and making sure we're gaining that buy-in. At the same time, though, it's not just about the elected officials, it's about the entire region. So we brought on board several other representatives of different agencies, making sure we have the housing interests represented. We have Iowa State University represented on there. The Greater Des Moines Partnership is the chamber for the entire metro area, so they're represented on there. Just making sure we have that buy-in from all the appropriate players and really making sure we're reaching out as needed. We also have a partners committee, which is really an extension of the steering committee. It's kind of a catch-all group for anybody and everybody working on issues from homelessness to water quality to natural resources. Again, anything and everything that makes the region function. These are the people that are working on these issues on a daily basis. I know I certainly don't have the expertise in all of those different areas, so we're really looking at those individuals to provide that expertise for us and make sure our plan is as rich as possible. We also have a technical committee, which is planners and engineers from around the metropolitan area. Again, these are the individuals working on these issues on a daily basis. And finally, the Young Professionals Advisory Committee. We had a lot of discussions when we were starting this out about who needed to be involved, and originally we thought we wanted to have a representative of the baby boomer generation on the steering committee, but then we got to talking about it more, and with this plan going out to the year 2050, this is about the next generation. And it's not just about what we have in place right now, it's about creating leaders for the next generation and making sure they're involved, that they feel like they can get involved and really make a difference. And I think because of that concerted effort, we have had great success engaging young professionals. We had a Design My DSM tool, which I'll show a little bit later, but 65% of the respondents were under the age of 45. So I think we were very pleased with that and really getting that generation that hasn't been involved in the planning process engaged with what we're doing. Now, when we're done in February, the Tomorrow Plan will serve as the umbrella plan for the entire Des Moines metro area. Communities and other agencies will continue to complete their own plans, but we hope that they do fall in line with what the Tomorrow Plan is recommending. Communities will continue to do their comprehensive plans. The MPO will continue its long-range transportation plan. DART, a transit agency, will continue with its transit planning. But again, we're all hoping to move towards that common vision and that common ground so we can create a better future for our region. With that, I'd like to move into some of our strengths. Now, you may have seen over the past few years some of these rankings that have been mentioned before. Des Moines has probably been on the list. You can see here, it's a great place to live, work, and play. Laundry list of things. #1, best city for young professionals from Forbes. Best cities for families, businesses and careers, jobs, local economy, educated young workforce. The list goes on and on. We're very proud of these achievements, but we don't just want to sit on our laurels. We want to continue to push the envelope and make sure we're being as progressive as possible and make sure we continue to have that biggest small town feel as well as the smallest big city. I think I said to Mark last night during dinner, seems that I can't go anywhere and not run into somebody I know, but I still have the opportunity to access some of the great amenities that you find in the larger cities. So it really is the best of both worlds. And my pride for Des Moines may come out. I've been there 3 years, and I just love it. I encourage any of you to come visit. It really is a wonderful place, and we only see it going upward. We also have a very engaged leadership. Top officials from around the metro area are involved, whether that's elected officials or business leaders. Right now, we have a Capital Crossroads effort going on right now. That is a collaboration between the Greater Des Moines Partnership, our chamber, and the Community Foundation of Greater Des Moines, looking at a larger geographic area, but 11 different capitals, ranging from the natural capital to physical capital to the social capital. The list goes on. But we've got top executives, the CEOs from companies like Wells Fargo, Meredith Corporation, the publisher of Better Homes and Gardens magazine, Principal Financial, Wellmark, Blue Cross Blue Shield. All their top officials are involved in these processes. And it's not just these processes, it's across the community. If there are nonprofits, there are fundraising efforts going on, they have a passion for our region, and so we're very fortunate in that way. Also, we have some great intergovernmental relations. With our region being relatively small, these leaders are working together on a variety of projects. As a result, we've been able to establish some great working relationships and also has positioned us to get things done in a more efficient manner. The bike culture in Greater Des Moines is just wonderful. We have nearly 700 miles of trails, more planned, linking all communities throughout the metro area, 2 loops of 100 or more miles. We also have a wide variety of events and organizations related to that bike culture. That Capital Crossroads group that I mentioned, one of their goals is to make Central Iowa the trails capital of the world. I know if I'm ever out on the trails riding my bike, can't count the number of people that I see. It's just constant use. So that's one thing that really draws people to the region. I know I've talked to people that have just recently moved to the area, and they're just astounded by the bike culture in the metro area. And again, it's not just for recreation, it's also for commuting purposes. Our infrastructure in Greater Des Moines has also been a great strength for us. The average commute is under 20 minutes in Greater Des Moines. Now, that has been a bit of a double-edged sword. It's hard to get people to use public transportation when we have such a short commute time. Related to our transit system, we just had the ribbon cutting for DART Central Station, which you can see a rendering of this Tuesday. It's a great new facility. It'll be opening the weekend after Thanksgiving. So we really hope that's going to change the culture of transit in our region. And finally, we do have a regional wastewater system that's been a great asset, and we are moving towards a regionalized drinking water system. Again, moving toward making that progress and again, leveraging those intergovernmental relations. So other strengths we have the emerging downtown core. We also, another ranking, one of America's best farmers markets. Downtown core over the last 10 or so years has really seen a revitalization. We have the Papa John Sculpture Garden. It's the largest sculpture garden outdoors. It's free for people to visit. Budding food culture. I was just talking to Mark earlier this morning, and we don't really have the local foods from farmers. It's the commodities that people are raising. But that budding food culture is coming about with our farmers market and people wanting to have more locally grown food, knowing their farmer, knowing where their food is coming from. Also, that diverse economy, the burgeoning Silicon Six. Talk a little bit more about that later, but this has been a great startup scene for us and really something that we want to continue to push on and have thrive in the future. Of course, you can't separate Iowa from the agricultural center and insurance. We have a huge sector of our industry that is related to the insurance sector. The arts and culture scene has also really taken off in the past several years. We have the 8035 Music Festival, just celebrated its 5th year. This is a huge festival, draws around 20,000 people each year, national acts from around the country. It's a 2-day event, so that's been great for our downtown culture as well. The Arts Festival, the Des Moines Social Club as well. River access, we have 2 rivers that converge in downtown Des Moines, and also public safety has been a great strength for our region as well. Now, it's not always roses though. We do have our fair share of challenges, so we'll get into those. First, that flood mitigation. Being at the confluence of 2 rivers does pose quite a few challenges. Since 1993, we've had 300-year floods, so lots of issues to deal with. What do we do with the displacements and closings? This right here, both of these pictures actually are from our downtown area, the core area where so many business and entertainment options are located. What does that do for our economy? Also, what are the health concerns when a lot of the low-income housing is located around these rivers or in areas that are located within the floodplain? What does that mean for contamination or the availability of fresh water? I believe in 1993, I wasn't in Des Moines then, but there was a shutdown of the city because there was no fresh water. So how do we deal with those kinds of challenges? Related, looking at water quality. We have some very, very polluted rivers in the Des Moines metro area. As you can see here, the Raccoon River is among the most polluted rivers in the entire country. You look at that, you look at what is that coming from? Well, a lot of it is from agricultural runoff, but a lot of it is people taking the rivers for granted. They don't see them as an amenity, they see them as a nuisance. And so we're working to change that mindset. We do have the largest nitrate treatment system in the world. Now, Des Moines Waterworks likes to brag about the #1 water quality, drinking water quality in the country, but we have to have this largest nitrate system to get that water quality. So is that something we really want to have, or do we want to try to reach that and fix that in the beginning? Again, looking at those steep eroding banks and the bacteria levels as well. Now, to address this, we're working with Capital Crossroads. We've identified some priority watershed management authorities, looking at how we can start to protect some of these different watersheds, looking at who are the key players, what are the roles, and again, looking at some case studies of what has been done elsewhere in our state. There was just legislation passed this year talking about some of these watershed management authorities, authorizing that. So looking at groups that are a little bit farther ahead and looking to them for their guidance and their expertise and what they've learned along the way. And I should mention on that water quality, this is really something that's risen to the top with our steering committee. They can see very clearly that this cuts across jurisdictional lines, whereas that has not been the case in some of the other areas. So this will be one of the first areas that we take on to have one of those early victories to kind of set the tone for the rest of the implementation process. The infrastructure. As I mentioned earlier, we do have a great infrastructure system, but it's aging. We have nearly 20% of our major roadways are ranked poor or lower. So are we going to continue to invest? Are we going to continue to build new roadways? What are we going to do as we move forward in the future? Looking at the dwindling resources as well. As I'm sure you all know, federal resources are scarce with the new transportation bill. Still figuring out how that's going to impact our region as will impact yours. Looking at how we can go about dealing with that issue. And also looking at the increase in vehicle miles traveled. Since 1990, nearly 7 miles increased for all people. So is that going to continue out into the future? Is that something we want to continue out into the future? Is a big question that we're looking at. And again, making sure the homes, the jobs, the workplaces, recreational places are located in close proximity to one another so we can cut down on some of those costs. I know I was looking at the board earlier on that side of the room looking at your housing and transportation costs. And it's just unbelievable how many people in this region are considered cost burdens, spending more than 45% of their income on those two pieces. Again, public transit, big challenge. In Greater Des Moines, we have a very auto-dependent culture. 95% of all of our trips are taken by the personal automobile, and many of those are single-occupant vehicles. We also have an abundance of parking. We're actually working on a parking study right now in our downtown area, looking at the glut of parking spaces that we have, and with jobs moving out to some of the suburbs, what are we going to do with all of those extra spaces? Also with budget cuts, as PART has experienced, we've had some reductions in service frequency. Sometimes there are hour-long waits. One individual actually said to us, I can't use public transportation without mapping out my entire day. So really, is that convenient for people? Are most people going to take the time to do that? Something we need to address. And also that stigma associated with public transit. Greater Des Moines, it's always been the people that can't afford the vehicle, or they're not able to get a license for whatever reason. So that's been a huge challenge for us. But we are addressing that with Drive Time Des Moines, which is a group working on getting people out of their cars, encouraging carpooling, van pooling, whatever it may be, telecommuting, and also working closely with DART, transit provider. They just completed their Forward 2035 plan, looking at some bus rapid transit in the future potentially, as well as their DART Central Station. We really believe that that's going to elevate the role of transit. In many people's eyes, it's a beautiful station. So we really think all of those things are going to help us address that. And again, that changing demographic as well. 30% less vehicles bought by 18 to 34-year-olds in the last 5 years alone. So obviously, this is going to be something that we need to deal with and continue to push for more public transportation use. Again, that aging population across the country. By 2035, 20% of Americans will be over age 65. Right now, we have nearly 29% of baby boomers, 29% of the population are baby boomers in Greater Des Moines. What are we going to do when they're aging, when they can't drive? Looking at the implications for the transportation system. Are they going to be able to access public transportation? Looking at land use. Are they in walkable neighborhoods? Looking at the placement of homes, businesses, and stores. Will they be able to access those key services? And finally, the healthcare system. What are they going to be able to access, and what kinds of health care are they going to need as we move forward? And finally, can we provide the ability to age in place? Now, throughout all of our public meetings, we've heard this as a major desire for some of the baby boomers. There's one gentleman in particular, he's the state director of AARP for Iowa. He's been in his neighborhood for around 20 years, but in another 10 or 15 years, he's not going to be able to or want to take care of his yard. But at the same time, he doesn't want to lose all of those social connections. So is there going to be that appropriate spot for him to stay in his neighborhood, but be able to downsize as well? So that's something we're struggling with. Again, looking at how do we make walkable neighborhoods. That's been a key piece for us, making walkable, mixed-use neighborhoods, not only for baby boomers, but also for generations X, Y, and Z. They're wanting those different pieces where they can walk down to the corner store and they don't have to have a car. Personally, I would love to not have a car. There's a new transit loop starting 3 blocks from my house this fall. I shouldn't have to use my car for work at all. I'll be able to bike or be able to use the bus, and I'm so excited about that. And I know that I'm not the only one like that in my generation. Again, the socioeconomic challenges. We have some largest disparities between the urban core, the suburban areas, and the rural areas. In the urban core, like many areas around the country, we have the highest concentrations of ethnic diversity, low-income residents, education challenges, distressed housing, and finally health challenges. You can see in the table on the right there, first column is the urban core. Over 45% of people living in that area make less than $25,000 a year. And you can see that changes dramatically as we look through some of the different areas, but you can see those huge differences and what that income trickles down to me in the rest of those areas as well. Again, we are working closely with Capital Crossroads. One of their capital areas is Capital Core. They're working on an entire 10-year strategy, looking at a community development corporation-like strategy, and really partnering with existing agencies to leverage the relationships that they already have. And some of those is the MPO. Coming in without a lot of those relationships, it's hard to build trust and gain that traction. But if we can partner with some of those groups that we already work with and that those communities already are engaged with, we're that much more primed for success. Now, Agenda 21ers, I talked to Mark a little bit about this last night. It sounds like you have not had as much exposure to the group. As a reminder, it's a non-binding resolution passed by the United Nations in 1992. The correlation that we've heard in Greater Des Moines is that this Agenda 21 mentions sustainable development, as does the Tomorrow Plan, as do all of these other HUD grant projects. So there have been some concerns, particularly in our region, concerns about property rights, the ideas of thinking at a regional level rather than having that local control, and the idea about sustainable planning in general. There are thoughts, that this is a communist plot, or this is a socialist plot, or whatever it may be, that I'm brainwashed. I've heard it all. But, we've really tried to bring those individuals into this process. Again, this isn't about my plan, Mark's plan, whose ever plan. It's about our plan as an entire group. With that, we've really tried to bring this group's ideas into the planning process. This is our Design My DSM tool that I mentioned earlier. And really, this was an online tool to get people thinking about their priorities. We're a list here of what things people want to see in Greater Des Moines. So we have some little icons there, and several of these pieces were added specifically because of input we received from some of these individuals. For example, I can build a house wherever I want. I can own an acre or more of land. I can always find a parking spot quickly. My community is exactly the way it is today. A lot of these were direct input from that group because we wanted to make sure we could provide all of the options for what people might want in the future. Now, it's not to say that it allayed all of those fears, but it did help tremendously as we move forward. Also, one thing our steering committee has really been challenged with is national brand. There's nothing to do in Des Moines, people say. Iowa's only corn and pigs. Well, wave the next time you fly over. We'll wave back because we're nice. Now, what we struggle with, though, is how do we attract that world-class talent in business? Now, as a young professional, first job out of Iowa State University, it was never my intention to stay in Iowa. I thought, I've been here all my life. I want to get out of here. I want to go see the world. But 3 years later, I love Des Moines. And it's hard to imagine moving anywhere else because of the wonderful things that are in this area, or in that area, So, anywhere I go, I try to be a champion for it and really help us reverse that brain drain. A few other challenges: conflict between Des Moines and the suburbs. We've gone through this process. Many people think, well, this is all about Des Moines, this is about the urban areas. We only want people to live in Des Moines. Well, no, that's not what it's about at all. Also, there's no desire for a regional entity or a council of governments. Greater Des Moines is the only area in the entire state of Iowa that does not have a council of governments. We used to back in the 1980s, but then there was some corruption, so there's a bit of hesitation, but it also makes for some great challenges as we move forward. Transportation being planned at the regional level definitely makes sense, but what about all of those other pieces that are just being done piecemeal? It's resulted in some duplication of services, as well as some inefficiencies. And finally, there's competition between the cities for tax space. As I mentioned, all those empty parking garages and lots in downtown Des Moines, big piece of that has been because some of our major employers have moved out to West Des Moines because they could have free parking. So it's that kind of competition that has really hurt our region and that we're really trying to shift away from. Part of that, working with the Greater Des Moines Partnership, our Chamber of Commerce, and really changing the mindset of individualism city by city. You compete as a region, not individually. You compete as a region. You rise together and you fall together. I was at a conference where Mitch Silver, the president of the American Planning Association, was presenting. And that was one thing that really stuck with me. It's not about my community, your community, especially in this global market, in this global economy. It's us as a region. Nobody's going to be thinking, I want to locate in Urbandale, or I want to be in Windsor Heights. I want to be in the Greater Des Moines region because it has all of these wonderful pieces and wonderful attributes going for it. So that's been a huge continuing challenge for us as we move forward, because it is that mindset that's been ingrained in people's minds for so many years. Now, given all those strengths and challenges, you can see we have a lot we're working on. Now we're working towards some of those outcomes. I want to reiterate, Tomorrow Plan is not a mandate. It will be a toolbox of recommendations for communities to consider implementing as they move forward with their own planning processes. So we have 10 principles that we're working towards. First, allowing for sustainable options that offer flexibility and then enhance mixed uses, walkability, accessibility, and a sense of place. Have some areas, this is in the East Village in downtown Des Moines. It's a great mixed-use neighborhood, very walkable, lots of little shops with condos, apartments on the second floor, but there aren't very many areas like that in Greater Des Moines. At the same time though, we're seeing all sorts of people wanting to live in that area because it is thriving, because it actually feels like someplace special, not any place that you can find just anywhere around the country. Secondly, supporting existing neighborhoods. We've already got the infrastructure in place, and as you all know, that is a huge investment. So why invest on the periphery and have to install all that new infrastructure when we already have it in place, when we have places that already feel like neighborhoods? Third, increasing housing and transportation choices while maintaining neighborhood character and enhancing that sense of place. You know, we don't want just any place around the country to look like this. We want to have that special place and also have those options if people don't want to own a vehicle, if they want to be able to walk everywhere, or if they want to use their bike, if they want to use the bus, and that's it, then we want to provide those options. But we also want to have those options where people can live out in the country and they can drive into work every day, or they can work from home, whatever they want. And that's really one thing that I've been trying to underscore throughout this whole planning process. The Tomorrow Plan is not about mandates, it's all about providing choices and what you want your future to be. Next, regionalizing infrastructure, services, and standards where appropriate and practical. Now, when we put this principle out, we were a little bit leery because of the regionalism push in it. You know, people think COG right away. Well, that's almost a bad word in central Iowa to some people. So we've started talking, you know, snow removal, for example, library services, fire services. We have, you know, some fire stations are closer than another fire station, but if the fire is in another jurisdiction, they can't respond to it, even though it would be more practical. Now, what sense does that make? Next, maintaining, enhancing, and connecting our parks, recreation, and conservation opportunities to promote the health of people as well as the environment itself. Just look at Grays Lake Park, just south of downtown Des Moines, named a great place by the American Planning Association. We have numerous parks, trails, conservation areas around the Greater Des Moines area. This has been a huge push for some of our committee members as well as the public in general. People love getting out, being able to connect with nature. So this has been a top priority for us and will continue to be as we move forward. Next, and related, preserving agricultural lands and natural systems by encouraging infill development. As I mentioned earlier, we have some of the top farmland in the entire world, but we're having this sprawling development taking over some of that land. Now, is that really the best decision for our future as far as the economy, as far as natural health? That's up for debate, not my place to answer that. But that is something we are taking a look at, and again, looking at that infill development and leveraging the infrastructure that we already have in place. Next, increasing our commitment to economic development and job creation. So you can see here, I mentioned earlier the Silicon 6, downtown area, numerous startups in that area. So making sure we're nurturing that community. Have all sorts of events related to the startup community going on, great success and great buy-in from the local governments, from business community in general. So that's something we really want to continue to push and nurture, as well as other local businesses, those small businesses that oftentimes have those major challenges. Next, enabling local stakeholders to work together to achieve regional goals while still protecting individual institutions. Now, the Tomorrow Plan is really one of the first times that the entire region has come together to have some of these larger conversations. It's the first time some of our Partners Committee partners have ever talked to one another. And they're working on very similar issues, so it's really opened up a lot of conversations. But we want to make sure that when the Tomorrow Plan is done in February, when the plan's all written, that those conversations don't stop. We need to continue to have those conversations and make sure that we position ourselves so that our region can not only compete, but win. Next, stormwater and flood management. Talked about this already. This has been a major issue for us as we move forward. The baseball stadium downtown, confluence of two rivers, looking at what green infrastructure strategies we can use rather than just building and building and building and trying to build our way out of that issue. And finally, fostering support for the continued evolution of entertainment, culture, and the arts in Greater Des Moines. We know that this is a key piece to attract that top business, that top talent. So this is something we really want to push. This is a picture of one of the pieces of artwork in the sculpture garden in the shadows of the downtown skyline. So again, making sure we nurture that and foster that. And with that, I just want to leave you with another quote by Mitch Silver. When you say no to something, you're saying yes to something else. So when you say no to something, think about what you're saying yes to, even if you don't realize it at first. Thank you very much.